class session one.
Okay, class session one of the most important things is talking about the systems triangle, people, process, and technology. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I swear to you, you should get that as a tattoo prior to the exam, so you don't forget that. So we started out by talking about the mini case in terms of who to blame. So the idea is technology is idiosyncratic to the organization. So we later blew this out to be the strategic, McFarland's strategic grid, talking about the need for innovation and the need for reliability. So understand those. You know, innovation is sexy as heck, but sometimes all you need is the reliability. We talked about the role of throughout the systems development lifecycle. So the SDLC, so identify, analyze, design, implement, test, evaluate, and we took a RACI perspective there. So responsible, accountable, consultant, and inform. So make sure you know that cycle. We talked about the role of the CIO, and talking about things related to like BYOD, Internet of Things. One of the big points that I tried to stress there, again, is the technology is pretty darn cheap. So Moore's Law, you know, the cost of the technology drops pretty quickly. Okay, so that was class one. Class two. Sorry, just getting it opened up. So class two, we started out with talking about iPad ordering. We talked about the difference between information systems and information technology. We talked about technology, people, process, and we added structure. We talked about IT sitting at the intersection of the firm strategy and firm culture. So some organizations are risk-taking, some are risk-adverse. We talked about first, second, and third order change. For first order change, automate, there was CalPAC, there was re-engineering. Second order change was informate. Third order change was transform, which brought the structure in. Talked about my research on China versus Saudi Arabia and the US in terms of nationalistic culture. So the idea that, you know, while that person next to you may look, even if they do look very similar, culturally being brought up, they're very different. So you're going to need to spend a fair bit of time understanding what the difference is between within the culture of the company, within the culture of the country. So that's going to drive a lot. So make sure you understand that, you know, not everybody is the same as you. Class three. Sorry, just takes me a second. Okay, class three, we talked about the hierarchical perspective, you know, shaped as a pyramid with operational, tactical, strategic. The pros and cons of that hierarchical orientation. Do you remember what the pros and cons of the hierarchical orientation are?
Like efficiency?
So the pros and cons of the big advantage with the hierarchical orientation is that you know where in the hierarchy. So, you know, if you're a transaction process, or you know if you're doing short-term strategic or short-term tactical or long-term strategic. We contrast, and so the type of information that you give is different. Okay, so with the operational people, you give them exactly as much information as they need to execute the transaction, and not a bit more. And then as you go up with the tactical and strategic, that changes. We talked about the we talked about the functional perspective. So the idea with the functional perspective is we're swooping across the organization. I'm sorry. Yeah, the idea with the functional perspective is you're taking a stovepipe view of the organization. So, you know whether you're in marketing, you know whether you're in supply chain, you know whether you're in finance, and so you can tailor your systems to be whatever that function is. Now I married up, as you recall, those two different perspectives. Okay, and I think that you're really existing at the center of that marriage. Talked about the difference, introduced the idea of enterprise systems. So enterprise system, definition, any system that supports the enterprise and uses a single database. We talked about configure versus customize, remember? Configure versus customize. We talked about a custom solution versus an integrated solution versus a best-of-breed solution. Very quickly, what are they? Custom solution is?
Build it yourself.
Yeah. Integrated solution? No, that's. So integrated, so we would just buy the solution from Oracle and we put it in their different places, and best of breed, you're gonna pick the best of one from different companies. We talked about some of the discussion about with enterprise systems, best practices are baked into it, and that kind of the pro and the con there. Should you ever custom develop an ERP?
No.
I would rather have you.
Kardashian.
Than do it.
Yeah.
It's a joke, you'll laugh at that. We talked about what an ERP is, finance and accounting, supply chain, CRM, knowledge management, business intelligence, and data warehousing. So make sure you know what those are. Remember my view on knowledge? Yes, I'm sorry.
Do you want us to know which is best for which function, which system?
What do you?
Like, do you want us to know that SAP is good for supply chain, PeopleSoft is good for? Okay.
You will impress me if you know that, but no, it's not necessary. The answer is going to be different in 6 months.
Great.
So, remember, I'm kind of negative on knowledge management systems. Why?
It's hard to pull off.
It's hard to pull off, yeah. Okay.
Just because it's hard?
Well,
People don't want to give their information, right?
yeah, people don't want to give their information out. And that's really kind of the big problem that, why am I going to share my information with you if that makes me expendable? It's not a value for me to do it. It's class session 3, class session 4. So class session 4, we started by talking about the history of the internet. Does anybody remember the original name for that? Come on, what is it?
Skynet.
No. The Intergalactic Computer Network. Best name ever. So we talked about the hacker case. Chapter 4 was about networks and network effects. With network effects, we talked about tipping point, positive, negative feedback associated with tipping points. We spent a lot of time talking about two-sided networks. What's an example of a two-sided network? eBay is a great example. Airbnb, Uber, any places like that. So we need to have buyers and suppliers, and there's got to be a certain number with each to make the network effective. We talked about tipping points of network and what causes a network to tip. We talked about what an information good is and how it differs from a physical good. High production. So a physical good an information good has high production development costs, but negligible replication costs and distribution costs, etc. A lot of people make the mistake of treating an information good like a physical good. And I think I used the example of booking a cruise. With chapter 5, again, well, it brings us to the great term, the Intergalactic Computer Network. We didn't have time to get into that much, but that's B2B, C2C, et cetera, et cetera. So I would not spend much time here on that chapter. All right, hang on. So chapter 6. chapter 6, strategic information systems plan. Okay, probably the most important concept there is the idea of strategic alignment, because you always want your technology to be aligned with, with whatever your business goals are, okay? We talked about the 6 key IS decisions: how much should we spend, what process should receive IP dollars, what capabilities need to be company-wide, etc. Those are all good things to know. We talked about the 5-step strategic IS planning process. You should be very comfortable with that. Let's see. So just details in there. This is when we really got into the strategic impact grid in terms of identifying which quadrant you should be in, which quadrant you want to be in, which quadrant you need to be in. So chapter 7 is about value creation, strategic information systems. It's got the total value created calculation. It's got the supplier opportunity cost, firm cost, price, competitive advantage, et cetera, Please God, skip it. That is chapter 7. I think you can just skip chapter 7. See, this is a darn problem. I write the final exam before the last class period. I'm like, yeah, that's not on it. Don't worry about it. I hate it when I do that. So same thing with that, with chapter 8, which gets into details of it. You can just, I think it's interesting stuff, but don't worry about it. Yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. Then I went straight to chapter 10, came back to chapter 9. So with chapter 10, this is that. So chapter 10 was funding and governance, which is probably one of my most favoriteest chapters in the entire world. IT governance refers to what? Who gets to make the decisions? Yep. You talk about competence risk, infrastructure risk, IT project risk. Those are all very, very good things to know. Talked about steering committees and role steering committees. Talked about the 3 different methods of funding IT. All good stuff to know. Talked about budgeting process, but more specifically, how to do a business case, fear, faith, and fact. Briefly mentioned TCO, and we talked about portfolio management, the fact that different organizations have a different percentage of their budget going to innovation versus strategic versus tactical stuff. So chapter 9. Okay, so chapter 9. Chapter 9 is how to appropriate value over time. Resource-based view, rare, valuable, inimitable, non-substitutable, barriers to erosion. These are all very good things to know. So make sure, and as part of that, the idea about how we should approach each one of these things. So do we develop it independently as part of a consortium or walk? Make sure you know that. Chapter 11. So chapter 11, so this is about the, how to develop systems. If you get yourself into a massive time crunch and you can only review one chapter, this is the chapter to review. If you run into a time crunch, this is the chapter you must know. Every darn word that was said in that class period. So am I like, giving things away too much?
Go on.
Which one's chapter 11?
Yeah, make sure, and if you've got any colleagues in the MSIM program, become real good friends with them. Chapter 12 is trends, so, have kind of a sense in terms of what's going on with trends, but I'm not gonna ask anything specifically. Chapter 13 is security, privacy, and ethics. You should know security, privacy, and ethics are major deals. Okay? And then, of course, we'll